I'm David Newby, retired president of the Wisconsin AFL-CIO, and I'd like to share with you some of the history of 100 years of Wisconsin apprenticeship from 1911 to 2011 under Wisconsin state law. It's a fascinating history, and it's still being made today in our current state-of-the-art apprenticeship training practices. Probably America's best-known apprentice, going back to our colonial period, was Benjamin Franklin. The future founding father was apprenticed as a printer to his older brother, James, at the age of 17. Under the apprenticeship system then in practice in Boston, inherited from Europe, James, as the master, had wide authority over his younger brother, and he used it, despite or maybe because of their fraternal connection, beating the young Ben and motivating him to run away to Philadelphia. This story illustrates some of the problems inherent in the old master-journeyman-apprentice system of pre-industrial America. Apprentices could be subject to abuse and exploitation by their masters, such as receiving little pay and physical abuse, and there was not a generally agreed-upon set of standards concerning what apprentices should learn or how they should learn it. Therefore, employers could not easily determine which prospective employees were qualified to do what, and fellow workers were equally wary of someone new on the job. Employers, unions, and ultimately government here in Wisconsin all saw the same problem, and by the early 20th century, they began to respond. Some of the first national unions, organized among skilled workers such as printers, carpenters, and bricklayers, saw that their capability to negotiate good contracts derived from the extent of their control of the source of skilled labor. So they began apprenticeship training programs to enhance that control. Originally primarily based on journeymen teaching apprentices on the job, those early programs broadened and deepened over time. Meanwhile, some Wisconsin employers, aware that the status quo was not producing sufficient numbers of workers with the skills needed, were searching for an alternative to the then chaotic state of apprenticeship training. The Wisconsin idea of reform, that government should assist all constituencies in society, including farmers, workers, and small businesses, became current in the early 20th century. It was sometimes espoused nationally by Republican Theodore Roosevelt, and here in Wisconsin by progressive Republican Robert M. Fighting Bob La Follette. Wisconsin became an innovative leader with the first workers' compensation system and the first apprenticeship training law, both passed by the Wisconsin legislature in 1911. Another outstanding figure contributing to legislation influenced by the Wisconsin idea was Charles McCarthy. The results in the form of legislation enacted into law in areas such as agriculture, business, education, labor, public health and welfare, and government administration were carefully documented by McCarthy himself in his book, The Wisconsin Idea, published in 1912. In 1909, the state legislature formed a Commission on Industrial and Agricultural Training to study what needed to be done in this area. C.P. Carey, Wisconsin Superintendent of Schools, was named to chair the commission, and Charles McCarthy was appointed as its secretary to study industrial education systems and to draw conclusions as to what steps Wisconsin should adopt. In Munich, McCarthy was much impressed by the trade school's approach of combining on-the-job skilled training related to specific trades with classroom training aimed at teaching mathematical calculation, sketching, blueprint reading, and other necessary skills, enabling students to understand not only what to do, but also why a certain methodology was necessary. Since most Wisconsin workers and young people did not graduate high school at that time, the idea of continuing education, forebearer of Wisconsin's technical college system of today and the University of Wisconsin extension of today, began to take hold as a way to provide such education and trade skills to apprentices, journeymen, and others. Following this investigation, The Commission report, McCarthy's work primarily, stressed both teaching by doing and compulsory continuing education for young people already employed, with teachers drawn from the ranks of skilled workers of the various trades. The report went on to propose state aid for these new continuation schools and an updating and greater standardization of apprentice training. These proposals were embodied in Chapter 616, Laws of Wisconsin, passed in 1911. McCarthy was ably assisted in facilitating the passage of new law by Mrs., later Dr., Jenny Willing McMullen Turner. Later, in 1922, she would receive a Ph.D. from the University of Wisconsin after writing a dissertation entitled The Right to Organize. The Apprenticeship Law of 1911 established a state board of industrial education, comprised, among other officials, of 3 employer representatives and 3 workers' representatives. The new law not only required attendance at continuation schools for 14 to 16-year-old apprentices, but also required employers to release them to attend class 5 hours per week. Still other new legal mandates included written agreements specifying terms of apprenticeship between employer and apprentice, and authorizing limited taxing power by local vocational school boards. These were sweeping measures for the time, but they were enacted into law without serious opposition and with a broad legislative and political consensus of support. In the years immediately following 1911, the main outlines of a statewide vocational and apprenticeship training system continued to take shape. The governmental agencies, regulations, and state and federal mandates have evolved considerably since 1911. Today, the state's key organization for implementing the program, the Bureau of Apprenticeship Standards, BAS, is part of Wisconsin's Department of Workforce Development. Let's listen to Karen Morgan, Executive Director of BAS, at a recent staff meeting.
With the passage of Chapter 106 in June 1911, Wisconsin became the first state in the country to have a regulated apprenticeship system. This legislation was a small part of the progressive movement which was sweeping Wisconsin at the time. Other far-reaching legislation which was passed during that period included the Wisconsin Vocational School System Act, called the Industrial Education Act, and workers' compensation legislation. The purposes of the apprenticeship program still hold true today after nearly 100 years of practice and tradition.
From 1911 to 2011, the world has changed dramatically. The economy has gone from boom to bust many times, and it wasn't necessarily easy to become an apprentice when work was scarce, or sometimes almost non-existent. Clyde Stevenson, an electrical apprentice, journeyman, and eventually an electrical contractor, and a veteran of World War II and the attack on Pearl Harbor, remembers his experience in the Appleton area.
I graduated from high school in 1938, Oconee High School, and it was tough to get work back in those days. There's still the Depression going on, and so in 1940 I went in the Marine Corps.
Clyde found his first opportunities for training in the U.S. Armed Forces. Once he returned to civilian life after the war, Clyde found a job as an electrical apprentice specializing in radio work.
So I had got a job at Langston Electric, where I did radio work, and the training program was very good with the vocational school. As far as the guys worked there, and they didn't have the facilities or the books or anything, all that. No, it was an excellent training program.
Apprenticeship was probably always most widespread in construction, where Joint Apprenticeship Committees, or JACs, were the prevailing mode for apprenticeship governance. Both union and management representatives serve on these JACs, though on a practical, everyday basis, the unions usually take the lead in running actual training. Underlying this process is the actual practice of journeyman and apprentice, both union members collaborating with each other, one as a teacher, the other as student. Beginning in the 1950s, some largely non-union employers in the industry, most not signatory to union contracts, established the Associated Building Contractors, or ABC. By the 1980s, ABC Wisconsin moved to form their own apprenticeship training programs. Steve Stone, president of ABC Wisconsin, shares this history.
We had many meetings with the Bureau of Apprenticeship, with organized labor, with legislators, and finally in August of 1987, the state did grant us the authority to sponsor an apprenticeship program. We had to submit standards. The craft training that we were doing, we stopped doing that and moved to full-fledged apprenticeship training so we could comply with all the standards in the state statutes. We do think there will be a skilled labor shortage in the future. Apprenticeship is imperative to keep the new people coming into the trade so that when the shortages hit, we do have resources to help build the projects that we need to build.
Today, the ABC construction employers and those under contract to unions, using the JAC model of apprenticeship training, rely on separate training programs. There are areas both of agreement and divergence across the union-non-union line. Let's look at examples of both. First, agreement. Here's David Poklenkowski, Secretary of the Utility Workers Coalition and Business Manager of International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 2304, on the looming lack of skilled labor and the significance of apprenticeship training.
One of the things that we've recognized in the time period between 2005 and 2015 is that we're going to see roughly half of the labor force retire due to the baby boomers coming of age. We have recognized then that it's very important for the industry to have a comprehensive workforce plan in place to address that change. And an apprenticeship program is essential to bringing new workers in, to replacing those old experienced workers and start getting them up to speed. For the most part, in our local, when people retire, they're being replaced. That's a good thing.
There is wide agreement among employers and unions alike that apprenticeship training will be crucial to maintaining a healthy economy in the future by filling the need for skilled labor. Now let's take a look at an employer perspective, one coming from a construction employer with a long tradition of working with unions. J.P. Cullen Incorporated of Janesville, a general contractor in commercial construction, utilizes apprentices extensively and has made that a core business value. Richard Cullen, Vice President for Field Operations, explains.
We're a union contractor, and so that training, that knowledge, puts the apprentices, as they become journeymen, a cut above the others. They have more knowledge. They have a good wage. They have good benefits, and they can really make a nice living for